E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā waka, e ngā hauewha, tihei muri ora. E tangi te kiki, e tangi te kaka, e tangi hoki āhau, tihei muri ora. Wau tū lilia I luma o lo oto pa ia ma lo oto ma malu le au whainga luenga pa ia o le atua, tupu ma alii, whale upolu te tofi ai mai se Samoa poto. Le awa me le whaaloalo, o te tala I atuai ma wha maalulu atuai, o le ata oto Sam whainga o le atu upele nu atu I tulatoa Samoa. Kia ora koutou, talofa lava ma loe lele, kia rana, ni sa pula vinaka, whakalofa lahi atu taloha ni, Modi and tēnā koutou katoa. Warmest of Pacific greetings and welcome to HRMI's online webinar launch for the Pacific module in 2021. Ngā mihi atu ki te atu. This week is Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori here in Aotearoa, and I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge all of the mana whenua of Aotearoa, and specifically Te Akitai Waiohua and Ngāti Whātua o Rākai, whose lands I live and work on. My name is Seota Afili Dr. Patrick Thompson. As you probably can tell, I am a Samoan, and I, along with Dr. Sam Manuela, both based at the University of Auckland here in New Zealand, are your Pacific Data co-leads, and we're looking forward to spending the next roughly 90 minutes with you as we update you on a number of things that myself, the team, and HRMI's wider squad have been up to since we last met virtually in 2020. It is a great honor and privilege to have you all here with us today. And I'd like to firstly get our team to introduce themselves to you all, so you will have some idea of who the people are that we'll be speaking to across this session. So let's begin with Dr. Manuela. Sam, please introduce yourself. Tell us where you are, where you're from, and one hobby you're passionate about besides human rights. And mine is, of course, everyone knows, Mariah Carey. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Patrick. Tura e ina au nā Manuela timu no Manahiki. E mokohuna o nā niroa e matapo Manuela o te toranga o te manurewa ko Nikau Rarotonga. E metua tāne noku ko ngā kinirora Manuela. E metua mama noku ko Nancy Rind, ko Sam O. Tēnā koutou e kia orana I te anga. Kia orana everyone, my name is Sam Manuela. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland and also a co-lead alongside Patrick for the Pacific module here with HRMI. I'm very excited to meet with you all today and I'm incredibly excited to be sharing a lot of the data that we have with you all. One key thing that I am quite passionate about aside from human rights, in my spare time, I do competitive weightlifting, and so I'm hoping to compete in our New Zealand Nationals at the end of this year, pending no COVID in our country. I'll pass on over to Roy.
Well, thank you, Sam. Kia ora koutou, kamna benini Māori. My name is Roy, and I am of Ikiribas and European descent. I'm currently doing my master's up here in Tamaki Makaurau at the University of Auckland. And I have been a research assistant on the Pacific module team, working alongside our two data leads, Sam and Patrick. One of my hobbies, I guess, that I've picked up since we've been in lockdown these last few weeks is running. So one of the only things that I can sort of be doing based at home. So I've sort of enjoyed doing that. And I will pass it over to Chad.
That's right. I'm Chad Clay. I'm an associate professor of international affairs at the University of Georgia here on Muskogee Creek land in the United States. I'm also the director of the Center for the Study of Global Issues there, and at HRMI, I am our methodology research and design lead. And a hobby that I'm passionate about is music in general, both the listening of music and the making of music itself. Really, you know, I've got a guitar back here behind me right now. And so I really enjoy doing that in my spare time. And I'll turn it over to Anne-Marie Brooke.
Kia ora, Chad. Kia ora koutou. I'm Anne-Marie Brooke. I am one of HRMI's co-founders and our vision and strategy lead. I'm based in Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington, Aotearoa. And something that I really like doing is going to gigs, so going to see live music. Preferably, my preference is for unseated gigs where everyone is dancing. And unfortunately, the pandemic has not been the best time for getting lots of gigs in, but I have managed to get to one or two over the last 18 months. And I will pass over to Talia.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Talia tōku ingoa. I'm Talia Keogh Rowden. My ancestors are from England and Scotland, and my family has been in Aotearoa, New Zealand for some time. I am the Communication and Strategy Lead for HRMI, for the Human Rights Measurement Initiative, based here in Te Whanganui, Aotearoa, also in Wellington, Aotearoa. I would like to, talk about all my very active hobbies, but really I would most like to be on a sofa with a book. Reading is my thing. It's really wonderful to be here today and to have all of you here. So thank you for joining us, and I'll pass over to Cece, Catherine.
Kia ora everyone, I am Cici and I am Survey Engagement and Operations Lead, and I'm based in Wellington, but I was made in Malaysia. So one thing I have picked up during lockdown was actually hairdressing. I started cutting my own hair. So you can see that my hair is getting shorter and shorter now. I'll pass it to Elisa.
Salopolava everyone. My name is Elisa Vinapola. My ancestors are from Scotland and Samoa. And I am the new Pacific Data Module Research Assistant. And funnily enough, my hobby is exactly the same as Roy's. I recently picked up running as well, and totally a lockdown thing. And I absolutely love it. It's so fun. But yeah, lovely to meet you all.
Thanks, team, for that introduction. I did not pick up running during this lockdown, so thank you for, showing me what I should actually be doing. Now, I'm hoping everyone watching has now had the opportunity to get to know you all a little better, which is super important for us as a team because we work across national borders and oceans. So throughout today's webinar, I just wanted to encourage all of you who are watching to pop some questions into the chat, and we'll compile them and answer them as they come through later in the program. So today's program has 2 sessions, and you'll see on the outline as we go through to give you an idea of what's coming up, some of the things that we will be covering off. Now, as we all know, it can be quite draining to have to sit in front of a computer screen for long periods of time, especially for those of us who are still under stay-at-home orders. So after the first 40 minutes of this session, we'll take a 10-minute break. And I hope you'll come back for the second half, where we've got some even more exciting items to share with you all. So after we present some of the key findings of the module at the end of the first half of the webinar, we'll host a Q&A session where the team will respond to your questions as best as we can. And again, at the end of the second session, after we show off the new features of the website, which will have the Pacific module data accessible on our rights tracker for the very first time. So more on that later. So for many of you, this is not the first time you've heard of HRMI. It's not the first time you've seen our faces and the work that we all do. But to all of our great supporters, I just wanted to say again, you are who makes HRMI's work possible, and we cannot thank you enough. But I'll keep trying across this session to remind you. So thank you again. But we are also aware that for many of you, this may be the first time you've tuned into a HRMI webinar, or one specifically on the Pacific module. So for those of you who are new here, I'd now like to take this opportunity to pass the mic over to Roy, who's going to give you a crash course on the history of the Pacific module and HRMI's work, so we can make sure that everyone's up to speed before we head into the rest of the program. So over to you, Roy.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick. So to start off with our webinar this morning, I'm just going to provide a bit of context to our Pacific module. So one of the ways in which we measure the human rights performances of different countries is by going straight to human rights experts. And Chad is going to go into a bit more detail about the specific methods that we use to measure human rights a bit later. But one of the ways that we do that is going to human rights experts all around the world and asking them to let us know how well their governments are doing in terms of meeting their human rights performance. And we do this through what is called our HRMI Expert Survey. And the Pacific module is a series of questions within the survey that is only asked to survey respondents from the Pacific region. So the Pacific module came out of a co-design workshop in August of 2019, and that was actually held up here in Auckland. And during this time, HRMI was looking to expand the work that it was doing in the Pacific region. And to do that, they brought about 40 or so representatives from around the Pacific together. And you can see those wonderful representatives in that photo there, to talanoa around human rights issues in the region and to help improve how HRMI might measure that. And it was during this workshop that our Pacific partners gave HRMI some really valuable insights into human rights issues in the region, and particularly issues that weren't necessarily being reflected within the questions asked in HRMI's original expert survey. So HRMI took this on board, And following the workshop and designed alongside our Pacific partners, a separate module or a separate set of questions was included in HRMI's expert survey to try and better reflect these issues. So the Pacific module was piloted last year, and this is the second year that we have put the module out, and so we're excited to be presenting the latest data to you this morning. So I'll just quickly go over what is covered in our Pacific module. So out of the human rights concerns that were mentioned during that co-design workshop, our Pacific partners identified and agreed upon 5 major themes. So in the module, we ask our human rights experts questions around the extent to which the climate crisis is affecting human rights. We ask questions around Indigenous sovereignty, and we also ask questions around Indigenous land rights, cultural rights, and then we have a series of questions around violence. So violence towards vulnerable groups, specifically the rainbow community, women and girls, violence against children, and violence against people with disabilities. So that kind of makes up our Pacific module. And we're really excited to be presenting the data from the latest survey that went out earlier in this year. So if you have any questions about the process of how we design the module, feel free to pop that in the chat and we'll get back to that in the Q&A later on. So thank you.
Thanks, Roy, for that great background information, succinct and informative, and also brought back some memories for me. So like Roy said, this module has been co-designed with our Pacific partners, and last year, before we put the module out as part of the HRMI expert survey this year, we held 2 talanoa sessions with a large group of you across the region around ways we could improve and better nuance the work of the survey, bearing in mind that we are well aware that there are inherent limitations to the type of data that can be collected via a survey. So at this point, I'd like to invite Sam now to come back to talk about some of the feedback that we collated from everyone and how we integrated that into this version of the module. So over to you, Sam.
Cool, thank you, Patrick. Yeah, so with the 2 talanoa that we held last year, so Patrick and I, as the co-leads, actually came on board after the first development of the Pacific module. So there was a bit of a learning curve for Patrick and I to get our head around the questions that were being asked and how best that we could reflect that amongst our experts who will be providing the data back for us to collate. And so part of that process was 2 talanoa that we had in September and beginning of October of last year. And so we invited people to come in and dialogue with us around some key questions, specifically looking at the questions that already existed within the Pacific module about what is being collected, also discussions around how it is being collected, and also information around what else that we could collect. And so across these 2 discussions, across these 2 talanoa, there are key themes that we picked up on in our dialogues with everyone. One was that overall, people were happy with the themes that we were collecting within. And we're very happy with that, given that Patrick and I weren't involved in the beginning phases of that, but when we are guided by the voices of our people, we are usually going to be guided into the right direction. And so I'm hearing that through the 2 talanoa that people were happy and delighted about these particular themes that we were collecting around. We were very confident that we were heading in the right direction with that. One key aspect also with that was that our experts wanted to ensure that we were recognizing the diversity across the Pacific region. And so this touches on to how the data is being collected. With a survey, generally there isn't much scope for getting into the fine nuanced details of how people experience human rights across the Pacific. With a survey, what we're trying to do is develop measures that are comparable and to be able to make meaningful comparisons across a wide range of groups. And so we had to, sorry, I'll try and talk a little bit louder. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So we were trying to balance a range of measures that can pick up data that we can compare across groups, but at the same time recognize the nuances within each unique Pacific nation. And so this really called upon the importance of our methodologies. And so we are restricted with a survey in the data that we can collect. However, drawing on our talanoa as a way of data collection as well, what we decided was to include open-ended questions for our experts to provide extra detail about the responses that they were providing. And this part was optional. We're also trying to balance the length of the survey. So on top of the actual HRMI survey itself, our experts who are located within the Pacific region are completing the Pacific module on top of that. So we're being very mindful of the length of the survey and the fatigue that can set in once you're completing these kinds of surveys to provide the easiest way that we could given the medium of data collection that we have. Within our talanoa as well, we're looking at what else could we collect. And again, this really touched on the importance of nuance across the Pacific region as well, recognizing that the experiences of human rights aren't a homogeneous experience within the Pacific. And so our open-ended questions really allowed us to delve a little bit deeper into the details, in addition to some additional open-ended questions at the end of the Pacific module that gave us more insights into wide areas that we could perhaps incorporate into future iterations of the surveys. And so at the moment, what the Pacific module looks like is a combination of scaled responses and open-ended questions, which our experts can and have provided input for. And so soon you will see when we go over the data that has been collected, the way it has been presented on the Human Rights Tracker, and also the collation of the qualitative responses that we can use moving forward to give more information about how human rights are being enacted within the Pacific, but also how we can use that information to inform future iterations of the survey as well.